This podcast contains explicit content and discussions related to real-life criminal activities, including violence and sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. The host's opinions are personal and are not representative of any individuals or organizations involved in the cases. We strive for accuracy, but if you've missed anything, please let us know. Thank you for listening. You're listening to Rotten Minds. I'm Kay.
And I'm V.
Can you imagine what surviving 7 years in captivity, your life controlled by a psychopathic man with the most bizarre fantasies looks like? Well, today we'll be getting into the case of Colleen Stan, also known as the girl in the box.
The thing with most psychopathic sexual predators is that most of them walk free after committing the most heinous crimes known to man. It's just honestly so infuriating that they get to sleep in a warm, comfortable bed with absolutely no worries while their victims can't get a night's rest because the moment they close their eyes, painful memories flood their minds. This man would have been able to walk free as well if it weren't for two brave women who managed to stay sane throughout years of mental and physical torture.
Before we get into the case, here's a disclaimer. This case contains mentions of kidnapping, sexual and physical abuse, so please listen with care. On the 19th of May, 1977, Colleen Stan was hitchhiking across the country to Northern California for her friend's birthday party. However, Colleen hadn't told her friend that she'd be in town because she wanted it to be a surprise. She had only told her family that she was hitchhiking to surprise her friend for her birthday and that she intended to stay there for a couple of days and then return home. Since then, no one heard from Colleen and no one could ever guess that she would be abducted shortly after.
Colleen J. Stan was born on December 31st, 1956 in Eugene, Oregon. She had a pretty normal childhood and grew up as the oldest of three sisters. She wanted a fresh start at the age of 20 and decided to move to Oregon to live with her friends. Colleen was quite experienced with hitchhiking and had done it many times before. So, she naturally developed the instinct to sense danger as she had spent quite some time traveling around. She was previously offered 2 rides before but denied after sensing something wasn't right.
The third time, she accepted a ride from a person called Cameron Hooker. Colleen stated that she had felt confident climbing into the blue van because of the presence of Hooker's wife, Janice, and their 8-month-old baby in the van. I think the woman and the baby being there put her at ease, with her thinking that probably nothing dangerous was going to happen, but boy, was she wrong. Let's take a deep dive back into Cameron and Janice's past. Cameron Hooker was born on November 5th, 1953. He had a pretty normal childhood. He grew up with a lot of friends and people described him as a happy kid. Cameron was 16 when his parents moved to Red Bluff, California. He began to become more withdrawn and was now quite socially awkward.
It was around 16 years old that he developed these sick fantasies and had an obsession with BDSM. He fantasized about dominating women and tying them up. But the sick thing about this was that he did not want the woman to consent. He must have really gotten high off of watching the pain, the sheer terror, and the feeling of superiority that made him feel like he was in complete control. Cameron graduated high school in 1972 and went to work at a lumber mill. Cameron was now 19 and craved to carry out this sexual passion. That's when he met 15-year-old Janice. There's quite an age gap here, and this allows room for power and balance, with her still being a minor at that time.
Janice was raised in a strictly religious family and was the youngest of 4 siblings. Janice had a pretty rocky relationship with her parents and her father was very distant. Janice's parents were pretty conservative and strict, so when she introduced Cameron to them, they were surprisingly accepting of him. They were fine with this 19-year-old adult man dating their 15-year-old teenage daughter. At first, Cameron was this amazing boyfriend. He took her out and bought her gifts and was pretty nice in general. Janice later claimed that he had asked her if he could tie her to a tree with these leather handcuffs like he had done with his previous girlfriends. Janice had not consented to all this, but went along with it because he used to be so nice after all of this.
This went on, and soon Cameron and Janice got married in 1975. So the nature of their relationship didn't change much. The same sort of abuse went on. Then, Janice asked Cameron for a baby, and this meant that the whole sexual fantasy thing needed to stop. They came to an agreement, and Cameron said that he wanted to continue these sexual pleasures. So Janice agreed, but on one condition. She agreed to him having sexual activities with a so-called sex slave, but couldn't have actual sex with them.
So Cameron started preparing to kidnap a girl and began changing his basement into a sort of torture chamber. He began attaching hooks to the roof and built a torture table where his victim would be strapped down. He had read a lot of pornographic magazines and had this wild obsession with this French erotic novel called Story of O. Soon after Janice had their baby, Cameron realizes that it is now his chance to finally get a sex slave. So he goes into the streets talking to women, but none of them matched his specific profile, I guess, so he continued to wait. And that was until he spotted Colleen J. Stan.
She got into his car, and I'm pretty sure this man was high off of adrenaline and excitement about finally getting a woman he thought was perfect for being his non-consenting sex slave. Colleen stated that throughout the ride, Cameron kept looking through the rearview mirror at her, seeming to check her out. She felt uncomfortable but didn't think much of it. When they stopped at a gas station, Colleen went to the bathroom. She recalled a voice, a gut feeling telling her to just jump out of the window and never look back. However, Colleen chose to ignore her gut instinct and went back to the car.
The ride continued on as normal until Cameron changed track into a deserted area. Cameron suggested getting out to visit some ice caves and he turned off the ignition and Janice and the baby got out of the car. As soon as they got out, Cameron quickly jumped in the backseat, holding a knife to Colleen's throat and a hand on her mouth. He asked her if she was going to listen to him, to which she, scared for her life, complied. Cameron then handcuffed Colleen before turning to a wooden box that was sitting on her side the whole time. Colleen later recalled that she hadn't taken much notice of the box beside her during the whole ride. The box had a hole, which was intended for your neck and had hinges around it. It had carpet that covered the insides of the box, which was designed to prevent light, sound, and fresh air from entering. The thing is that this box was designed with soundproof material, so even if she screamed, no one would hear her. He put it over her head and Colleen sat in the backseat for the whole ride back to the couple's home in Red Bluff, California. They reached their house and Cameron waited for it to turn dark so that his neighbors couldn't notice what he was doing.
Cameron then took Colleen to the basement and took off all her clothes and made her stand on an icebox. Then proceeded to attach her hands to straps that were then attached to hooks on the ceiling. Then without saying anything, pulled the ice chest from under her and she was suspended there by the hooks. She began screaming and Cameron took out a whip, seemingly to punish her, and told her to shut up, and she complied. He began whipping her until she stopped screaming and crying, and then he went upstairs. And this is honestly so freaking sickening to talk about even, so imagining how horrible it must have been to go through all of this. He brings Janice down, and right beneath Colleen, who was suspended in the air by the restraints on the ceiling, they began to have sex. After they were done, both of them went upstairs and left Colleen still suspended in the air with nothing to support her feet. So I could only imagine how much it must have hurt, being suspended in the air with your wrists bearing your whole body weight for a long time.
A short while later, Cameron comes back and lets Colleen down, but with the headbox still on. He forced her to lie in this coffin-like box, which becomes a very crucial piece of evidence later on. He restrained her hands to the sides of the box so that she couldn't move and left her for the entire night, still with the wooden box on her head. And the headbox was filled with carpeting as I had previously mentioned, so imagine how much she must have struggled to breathe and how claustrophobic it must have felt for her. This continued on for the next 7 years. She was only let out for one of the 24 hours to eat, drink water, and come back, and she was put back into the coffin again. The most enraging thing is that she wasn't even allowed to use the bathroom. She was forced to use a bedpan, which I don't even know how she managed to use it, being cramped in a literal coffin. And Colleen was told that if she ever attempted to scream, he would cut out her vocal cords, and he had quite the experience doing that. So Colleen believed him and never screamed.
This continued on for weeks until Colleen's housemates started to get worried because she hadn't returned from her friend's house after the birthday party. So they called her parents and told them, and Colleen's parents, growing worried, immediately went to Westwood, California and asked around, showing their daughter's picture, and went to different towns to put out posters for their missing daughter. Time started to slip away, and the couple began to lose hope and thought that their daughter had either been killed or had joined a cult. They had then began to give up. Meanwhile, Janice and Cameron Hooker continued to live in their home, completely unbothered about literally having a girl tied up in their basement. Janice used to stay at home and look after the baby, and Cameron used to go to work. When Cameron came back from work, he would go straight to the basement and continue to torture Colleen. He also used to take pictures in order to relive his sexual fantasies later on.
Cameron then built another torture device, which he called a wreck. It was basically like a medieval torture machine that stretches a person's body. He would attach her hands and legs to 4 parts of the machine and then literally stretch her, then attach electric wires to her and shock her. Colleen was stretched on racks, electrocuted, whipped until she bled, and was tied up and left to hang by her wrists for hours on end. Colleen was allowed to have her first bath in August of 1977, 4 months after her abduction. This man was so freaking sick in the head that he even denied her basic human rights. In November, she was provided a little bit more freedom. She was allowed to get out of the box and was allowed to perform chores in the house, but she had to do it naked. He continued to abuse her sexually and physically over the next few months.
Then, on January 25th, 1978, Cameron revealed a secret that he was a part of a powerful organization called the Company. He then proceeded to tell her that they had this mass organization of very rich, powerful people who owned slaves. Colleen later claimed in an interview that he had compared it to the mafia and said that if she ever tried to run away, they'd come and get her. He told her that she would be nailed to a cross and left for days, and that they observed their slaves through high-tech surveillance, and if they were caught trying to escape, their family would be killed along with them. Colleen was so broken and so mentally traumatized from all that he had done to her, and so she believed him, so she never tried to escape.
Then he produced a contract, a slave contract. In the contract, Cameron was a master who went by the name Michael Powers. The contract stated that Michael Powers had complete control over Colleen, her body, her soul, all her possessions, and everything. In the contract, she was also asked to submit herself to her master, who was Cameron, and never speak unless he permitted her to. Colleen's name was changed to Kay, and I think this was a way of Cameron taking her identity away from her, as a whole, basically objectifying her even further. She was told that the organization was watching her and that she had to sign the contract. Janice was also made to sign the contract, and a short while after the contract was signed, she let Cameron have sex with Colleen. Colleen was now being raped, adding to the torture she endured. This went on, and then Cameron and Janice decided to move into a trailer. The trailer had a waterbed, and under it was a wooden frame, which Cameron thought would be a good place to keep Colleen. So now Colleen was being locked in this coffin box under a wooden board which was under the waterbed. There was also the picture of a woman taped to the side of the box, kind of to make it more homely, which turns out to be a piece of evidence later on, so please keep this in mind. Colleen said that she managed to stay sane and not lose her mind by just thinking about her happy memories, times with her family, and kind of just imagine that she was with them instead of being in this box. During those 2 years, she was allowed to continue doing her chores and being out of her box a little longer.
Then, over time, Colleen was allowed to garden and was introduced to the neighbors and was even allowed to go on jogs. I think this was because of Cameron's arrogance that he knew that Colleen wouldn't try and escape. And unfortunately, he was right. She wouldn't because of a fear of the made-up The Company. Janice then later went on to have another child on the same waterbed just above Colleen. She was now allowed to look after the 2 kids and do household chores, but she had to return to the box later. It had now been 3 years since Colleen's abduction, and she was given a Christmas present by Cameron, that being a call to her family, with Cameron knowing that she wouldn't open her mouth about the abduction. Colleen called and her younger sister picked up. She did not talk about anything else but assured her sister that she was fine and she was safe. Now Cameron was so proud of himself for disciplining her in such a way that she didn't even bother trying to escape. So he decided to take it a step further. He allowed her to visit her family. 3 months later, on the way to visit her family, she was told that the company was watching her and that if she spoke anything of what was going on, they'd kill her. Colleen was also ordered to address Cameron as Mike Powers and tell her family that he had gone for a work conference in San Diego and that's why he couldn't stay. She was allowed to introduce Mike Powers as her fiancé, which is honestly just so sickening. She was allowed to stay there for 24 hours and much of the time she didn't talk much. And her family claimed that they knew something was wrong with her, but they hesitated on pushing her further and asking if she joined the cult, which would then cause her to drift further away from them, so they asked nothing. 24 hours later, Cameron came to pick Colleen, and the family took a picture of the two. Colleen with her hands wrapped around Cameron's neck and the both of them smiling like they were the most lovey-dovey couple in the world when that was the furthest from the truth. When they reached back in Red Bluff, California, Cameron felt that he had given his slave too much freedom and decided to lock Colleen in the coffin for 23 hours of the day again. I can't even begin to process how it must have felt for Colleen, because it messes with you so much mentally. You finally feel like you're making progress with your abuser and then they completely change again and you're back to square one. And then you have to go through the repeated process of abuse and that feeling of hopelessness you fought so hard to get over.
Then in the year of 1983, Colleen was allowed to get out of the box and look after the children again, and even was told to get a job. She got a job as a cleaner and every penny she earned went directly to Cameron. She would then come home again to get assayed and locked in the box again. Cameron now felt dissatisfied with just having one sex slave and decided to abduct more women. So he began building a dungeon for them with the help of Colleen. She was told that he would kidnap more sex slaves and that she had to train them so that they could become as good of a sex slave as her. Then in 1984, which is 7 years into Colleen's abduction, Cameron begins spending more and more time with her and starts growing attached to her and wants her as his second wife. Janice starts to become jealous of their relationship and throws a fit, asking Cameron to lock her again in the box, which he does.
Then later, Janice starts feeling guilty and lets Colleen out of the box and reads the Bible with her. Now, Janice had begun to take a liking to Christianity, and both Janice and Cameron knew that Colleen was a devout Christian, so she decided to get closer to Colleen through religion. They get closer over time, and then finally Janice tells Colleen that Cameron was not in fact a part of the company and that it didn't exist, but was rather a method to trick Colleen into submitting to him. Colleen, after finding this out shortly after, walks right out the door and leaves to the bus station. At the bus station, she calls Cameron and tells him that she was done and she was leaving, to which he responded by crying. Colleen then called her dad and told her that she was coming back.
The shocking part is that after getting back home, she didn't open up one word about where she'd been or what had happened to her, probably just because she wanted to put it behind her and start new. She stayed in touch with Cameron and Janice convinced Colleen to come to an agreement to try and reform Cameron, which I suspect is them showing signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Now, if you don't know what Stockholm Syndrome is, it is a psychological condition where victims develop an emotional bond with their captors. This can lead to defending or sympathizing with their captors despite the danger they pose. This term originated from a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, in which the captives aided their captors.
3 months after Colleen left, Janice had enough and confessed to the priest in the church she attended. He stated that he felt like it wasn't something he should listen to alone, so after Janice complied, she told this to the police too. She informed Lieutenant Jerry D. Brown of the Red Bluff Police that Cameron had kidnapped, tortured, and murdered Marie Elizabeth Spanik, who had disappeared on January 31st, 1976. Remember the picture in Colleen's box? That was Marie Elizabeth. Crazy, right? Apparently, just a year before kidnapping Colleen, they abducted Marie Liz in the same manner and she wouldn't stop screaming in the car. So, Cameron got in the back seat and attempted to cut her vocal cords out. Sadly, he ended up killing her in the process. So Janice takes the authorities to a nearby park where she last remembered they buried the body. But unfortunately, the authorities were unable to find the body and so the murder charge was dropped. They started to investigate her claims because it felt so strange and they found it hard to believe her until they got a statement from Colleen as well.
Cameron was finally arrested with the evidence of his torture devices and even a copy of the sex slave contracts. He was arrested with the charges of abduction, false imprisonment, and sexual abuse. Janice too was arrested, but allowed full immunity in exchange for a testament against her husband. Finally, Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison on the charges of sexual assaults, kidnapping, and using a knife in the process. On April 25, 2015, he was denied the chance for parole, and he would be eligible for another parole hearing again in 2030. If we're really taking a look into Cameron Hooker's psyche, he's just honestly a deranged, sexually motivated psychopath. I just want to say that this is just purely my opinion. Even the judges working on the case said that Cameron Hooker was the worst psychopath that they had ever seen.
I seriously can't imagine how it must have been for Colleen. Especially because she spent literally all of her 20s with these people and developed a bond with them. So after months and years of trauma, it had kind of become the new normal for her. She must have felt kind of grateful to Cameron as he had previously taken away all of her basic human rights. Then when she used to behave, he gave her small fractions of what she was supposed to have. I think it kind of felt like a reward, a gift for being so obedient to him. Honestly, I'm so proud of her for going through all of that and still remaining sane.
Colleen Stan later earned an accounting degree, now advocates and volunteers for abused women. Janice reverted to her maiden name Lashley and became a social worker and a mental health professional.
That's the end of today's case. It's honestly quite depressing and I can't imagine how hard it must be for Colleen to continue living normally after everything that has happened to her. I'm so glad and so proud of her trying to move on and trying to live her life even after all that she had been through, and this just honestly goes to show her bravery and resilience.
Do you feel bad for Janice as well?
I mean, on a certain degree, kind of, because she too was a victim of Cameron Hooker. She had quite, literally almost no choice.
Do you think she was groomed into this and she became complicit, right?
I mean, she was 15 years old when he started abusing her, so this kind of became the norm for her.
When you actually think about it, when he decided to expand his sex slaves numbers, right? Even Colleen was helping him build a new dungeon or something, right? I think after a while, you just try to survive. I just guess that's how us humans are. Just try to not get on his bad side and just try to survive no matter what.
Yeah, that is kind of the whole perspective of the Stockholm Syndrome, because you kind of start, because they take away everything from you and slowly give you the things that you're supposed to have, you kind of feel like you should be grateful to them for giving you the most basic things that you already deserve.
But yeah, I guess this is, I remember watching Money Heist, and in that, there's literally a character called Stockholm, right?
Yeah.
Denver and Stockholm.
Yeah.
That's one of the times that I was introduced to this condition of Stockholm Syndrome. So yeah, I guess, well, that's it for today's case. Let us know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay safe out there. And we'll see you in the next episode. I'm Kay.
And I'm V.
And this has been Rotten Minds.